What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the early read week 10. Not sure how we got here so fast, but we are indeed at week 10. By the time Saturday kicks off, it will be November football. I don't know where the time has gone, but to come on to the show this week to preview the entire week 10 slate, get us set for some of the biggest games on the card, and as well as hit some of the bigger G5 games on the card. It's, of course, good friend of the show, Duck, at StepOnADuck1 on Twitter, one of the sharper minds in the college football space. He's come on the pod a bunch of times, giving out a bunch of insightful info. Happy to have him back on. Duck, welcome back to the show, man. How's it going?
Doing really well. Yeah, the season is just cruising along here. We're at week 10. We're really going to start to see some teams separate themselves and really solidify their positioning in conference championship races. And man, rivalry week will be here before we know it. So it's a great time of the season, but it just goes way too quickly, my friend, as you know.
It's been going way too fast. And I'm still almost thinking like, well, these teams are still like getting their feet wet in conference play. But then I look at these schedules, I'm like, man, there's only like after this week, there's like 3-4 games left for these teams. And then all of a sudden it's championship weekend. And time's running out fast for some of these teams to get those signature wins to make sure they're in good standing. And we have a few games this week that are really going to help, I think, sort out a lot. Like I was looking at this card and I was thinking, what games do we have to talk about? I like to talk about some of the marquee games. Then obviously we like to get a word on a bunch. And outside of Ohio State, Penn State, I would say that there's maybe not like a consequential like matchup like last week. We had like Texas A&M, LSU, like a huge like, all right, this is like a almost not a loser leaves town, but almost like a college football playoff entrance exam, like to really be taken seriously here. You got Ohio State, Penn State, but then after that, you have like some tests for teams that want to make the playoff, but maybe not the opponent that's trying to play more spoiler than anything. So I think that sets up some unique matchups from a viewing perspective. And then, of course, we're going to have some thoughts on the betting side of things. Let's start where we always do, though, with recapping some week 9. Solid week for myself, trying to stack this up now, trying to finish the season on a high note as we get into November. I'll start, Duck, with my guy of the week. Let's go Dylan Rizek, UCF's 4th string quarterback. Didn't even know he's on the depth chart, but as someone who had an over in BYU UCF, that was a pretty frustrating game to watch, watching UCF turnover in BYU territory, watching BYU kind of methodically move down the field. But Dylan Rizek came in 4th quarter, let a quick hitting touchdown drive. BYU rolls right down the field. They kick a field goal. 2-minute drill for Mr. Rizek here. Sends the game over the total on a broken coverage there. Covers all the numbers. I had a piece of 53.5. I had some 55.5. Didn't matter the number. The game went over the total. So Dylan Rizek, I think he's in line to start this weekend while they host Arizona as a 6-point favorite. Well, that tells you the state of Arizona football. But Dylan Rizek, I was a little impressed. I'm not going to lie. I know it was garbage time and everything, but maybe Gus could unlock something else with this one as he keeps a circus there. But any thoughts there on UCF BYU with my guy Dylan Rizek coming in?
When you're under the total and there's time remaining on the clock, there is no such thing as garbage time, my friend. Every snap is meaningful. Every play is really important. And I just absolutely love those situations. We always seem to remember the bad beats. We remember the times when the guy is in that situation and the receiver drops the wide open touchdown pass or the quarterback holds on to it half a second longer and he gets sacked. You always remember those bad beats that don't come through. It's nice to be on the right side of those, and over the long haul, right, over 500 or 1,000 plays, they do start to even out, which is nice.
And I always like to yell on Twitter about the bad beats I get and stuff, but it's nice to, sometimes get a few bounces your way, and in the moment, obviously you're like, wow, like what a rush, what a win. And then like when the bad one hits, like, this is ridiculous. Like, how's that? Like, how is this happening? So it's always nice to get a few wild ones, especially on one of my bigger plays of the week being the UCF BYU over. So maybe it's lucky, maybe it was deserved, and it just came in a pretty unique type of way. But we take the winners where we could get them. Duck, who's someone you want to shout out from week 9?
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about Bowling Green this season in the MAC. We talked about him in the MAC preview. Bowling Green finally gets over the hump this year against Toledo, largely in part due to 2 interceptions from my guy of the week, Bowling Green cornerback Jordan Oladonkun, who had 2 interceptions of Tucker Gleason. One of them was returned 61 yards for a touchdown. He also had a massive pass defense on one of Toledo's last real meaningful series in the middle of the fourth quarter, and the guy just came up clutch all day on defense. And the Toledo defense in the second half really locked in against Toledo's offense on the road. No points allowed over the last 24 minutes, and the final 5 Toledo drives went punt, turnover, and then 2 stopped on down. So Bowling Green defense locked in, largely in part due to my guy of the week, Bowling Green corner Jordan Oladokun.
And Bowling Green on a bye before action gets started next week. And you look at that schedule because they dropped the game to Northern Illinois, bit of a dud, some injuries, some missed field goals and everything. But this was a game they had to have if they wanted to get back in the MAC title race, I would say. Now back to being the favorite in terms of odds. You look at the rest of their schedule. You're at Central Michigan, who I think is a dead team walking. You host Western Michigan, who is good, but not that home field means much, but you're going to be favored in that game against Western Michigan. You're at Ball State, who is the dregs of the conference. And you're home for Miami of Ohio, who is not the same team as last year's team. It's kind of all there now for Bowling Green to get to that MAC title game and get over the hump. I don't know the last time they won off the top of my head, but this was a team we were both high on. We obviously did the MAC preview together, so that was a big game. Big win. I had Bowling Green +3 in that game. I watched pretty much the entire second half. First half I wasn't as locked in, but that was a big win, and honestly a pretty justified win. That wasn't a fluke to get that 2-score win. I think Bowling Green was a better team throughout.
Yeah, they were. They controlled a lot of the first half. It got close there at the end of the first half, and then the second half was just really the better team rose to the top. You bring up an interesting point on Western Michigan, because Western Michigan, I think, is a good football team. They're much better than last year's team, and I think they're really building momentum with their head coach as well, Taylor. But I think this middle stretch of the season, it was to be expected for Western Michigan to kind of pile in on some wins. Look who they've beaten: Ball State, Akron, Buffalo, Kent State, possibly the worst 4 teams in the MAC. Now the competition stiffens, and so we'll really find out a lot about Western Michigan. But either way, Bowling Green has everything firmly in their grasp, right? They're 3-1 in the MAC. The only team that they're looking up at is Western. They play Western at home. They'll have a chance to eliminate Miami of Ohio. I'm still not sure about the Ohio Bobcats and how great they are. I think there's still a loss or 2 on their schedule. So all right in front of the Falcons to get back to Detroit.
I would say just by watching, I think Bowling Green is the best team. I haven't Powerade the best team we've seen them play high-end competition. It seems like there's a bit of a lull. Maybe it was the taxing games of playing Penn State, then playing A&M, and then getting taken the distance, obviously, and losing outright to Old Dominion, a team that I could never seem to get right. But it seems like now they've kind of stabilized in MAC play. So on a bye this week, and we'll see if Bowling Green can get back and get over the hump in the MAC. For me, not my guy. So I had a good week last week. So the complaints are few and far between. But I got to find someone to blame for this New Mexico non-cover against Colorado State. Devin Dampier, he's not my guy of the week, the quarterback. Listen, you want the success as the quarterback, you got to deal with the consequences of the quarterback, and you're not my guy of the week. New Mexico, 453 total yards and lost 17-6 to Colorado State. They allowed a punt return for a touchdown, so they lost 10 Colorado State offense, 7 Colorado State special teams, 6 New Mexico offense. They were plus 142 in terms of total yards, -3 in turnover margin, including 2 red zone fumbles. One drive got to the 1-yard line. They couldn't punch it in. They got a false start, then fumbled it. So New Mexico, again, it was a good week, so I'll keep it short. But that was a game that this Colorado State team, I have their win total over. I think they're terrible, and I think they're going to end up getting over their win total of 6.5. They're at, I believe, 5-3 now. But this Colorado State team is no good. They have been just fluking their way through some of these games. But New Mexico, in my opinion, the clear right side is, I had 7 close 3.5. I'll take that any day of the week, and just could not score a touchdown to cover that spread. So not my guy of the week, Devin Dampier.
Yeah, and to add to that too, 7 New Mexico drives that crossed the 50 that ended in 0 points. They were moving the ball between the 20s all game, and really conservative decision making on offense too, which was uncharacteristic of New Mexico, who's kind of just been playing with nothing to lose and playing loose the last several weeks. And they really played tight. It was really unfortunate to see. So yeah, that was disappointing.
That was a tough one. But what else you got? Where else you looking?
Yep, not my guy. So I did cover this number with Texas Tech against the spread, but I had Texas Tech on the money line. Not my guy of the week is Texas Tech cornerback Macho Stevenson. He was torched twice on long touchdown passes surrendered against TCU receivers. He had a couple of missed tackles in late stages. And on the last touchdown that TCU scored with about 4 minutes remaining, the effort given by him was just so pathetic. After surrendering the catch, he barely made an effort to push the guy out of bounds. And then when the receiver didn't go out of bounds, I mean, come on, Macho, you quit running at the 50-yard line. Show some effort here to make the tackle while your team is still ahead and you surrender that score. It was just rough to watch the defensive effort. And when Texas Tech got up by 17 points, the whole team just quit with the intensity, right? The last 4 offensive drives were field goal, punt, fumble, and it was just sickening to watch them flub that game away when you had them on the money line.
I'm surprised you didn't go with the backup quarterback. What was that, like Hillenbrand or something or whatever, with that late fumble. But I guess he helped get them ahead, so you got to give him a little bit of respect. But I'll tell you one thing. I was sitting with Texas Tech 6.5. That pitchy woo-woo at the end of the game nearly sent me. That was one of the landmines I avoided last week. But if that pitching it back and forth kept going, and then they end up in the end zone, I'm like, oh my, like this is how it ends. I've seen this story a million times, but thankfully at least they covered, but money line was tough.
Yeah, and they had players in the end zone with the ball too. So I mean, it could have been a disaster.
I was hoping they just kept going, and it just like fell out of the back of the end zone, like safety, and the game ends. Because I was just like, oh no, it just. And then the ball's on the floor, and they start kicking it around, and I'm like, oh my god, because these D linemen, they're gonna pick it up and try and run it in themselves. So I'm like, just please fall on it, whatever you do, just kick it out, something, please, someone just land on the ball. But yeah, I mean, money line, awful,
brutal,
awful. TCU, I mean, that's. Again, it's part of the reason why I bet Texas Tech in the first place. A team you don't want to back as a favorite, a team you like as an underdog because they could play up and down to their competition, capture some of that variance. But laying around a touchdown, no thank you. Especially these Big 12 teams. They're all, for the most part, I'd say 60% of the conference is within a field goal of each other, maybe even more than that.
Yeah, and looking forward at TCU too, I just feel like they're super soft. Now Sonny Dykes has really modified his coaching style over the last couple of years. He's a much different coach with offensive philosophy compared to his time at Louisiana Tech and Cal. They're really trying to make a concerted effort to run the football, but they're just not. I don't think they have the fortitude in the trenches to really hold up and through the rest of the season. They've still got 4 games left. I guess they're kind of in the Big 12 race, but with no, I don't think they're going to really factor. Yeah. And I will likely fade them at Baylor.
Yeah, I played some early over on Baylor in the early markets, but great stuff on week 9. Let's turn the page though to week 10. We got a big game in Happy Valley. Big noon kickoff. Ohio State traveling to Penn State. So my outlook, first of all, we got Ohio State laying 3.5, total of 47 going into this Big Ten showdown. Before we get to breaking down this game, the huge news, obviously, from last week is that Penn State quarterback Drew Aller suffered did they call it a knee injury, a leg injury? His status is up in the air for this one. Bo Perdula comes in. I think I said his name right. I'm going to have to get more familiar with that. He comes in. He's been used as kind of like a Swiss Army knife type quarterback this season in different packages, but came in last week against Wisconsin, got the job done, did what was necessary to win. Obviously, if Aller doesn't go, I do think I don't know how much of the downgrade. That's probably where your handicap lies. But I do think it's a downgrade because I still think Drew Aller has the arm talent, and he, to me, showed some serious growth against USC. That was a big game for him to really kind of shake that big game nerve, whatever you want to call it, because we've seen him in big games really kind of drop the ball in his young career. If it is Prabula, I do think there's going to be some concerns about this Ohio State defensive line. But on the other side, you watch Ohio State, you lose to Oregon, you then play Nebraska, kind of drag your feet through the game, needed some help, but Ohio State moved the ball. I am not going to, I guess you could say I'm concerned, but I don't think that that close result is necessarily that, oh, warning flags are up, this is a disaster. I don't know if I'm there yet, but what is true is that Ohio State is down there, one of their best offensive linemen in Josh Simmons, and another offensive lineman got hurt last week. You're facing, I think, the best defensive line in the Big Ten. Maybe Ohio State's is better, but I would probably rate Penn State's higher than Oregon's. Is Ohio State going to be able to dictate this game? Duck, I'll give you first word. I kind of laid out some different keys in this game and where we're at. Again, Ohio State laying 3.5 on the road against Penn State, total 47. 47.
You really hit on all my notes, right? Obviously, the key is the quarterback situation, and if he's going to be able to come back in this game. Right now, the reports out of Penn State camp are that he's going to be a game-time decision, and so who really knows what that means?
We're not going to know until we're going to have no idea.
Yeah, even if he warms up, I mean, the gamesmanship could be all over the place here, so who really does know? But I'm really concerned about the Ohio State offense, even beyond the Nebraska game. And it's not that they're bad, but it's just that you have not seen the explosiveness from Ohio State that we're accustomed to seeing. They could not run the ball against Nebraska, in part due to the two offensive linemen that are out, and only 2 explosive pass plays the entire game against the Huskers. And so I definitely believe that there's a formula to just creating problems for Ohio State's offense and forcing them to just be methodical. On the other side, well, I guess on that same side too, Ohio State is 49th in offensive havoc allowed. So havoc is described as things like sacks, pressures, negative plays, and turnovers. And Ohio State has surrendered some of that this year. So it's not as though even in the soft opening schedule that they've had, I mean, they've still given up some negative plays and haven't covered a ton of spreads. And I think that you're just starting to see a team that is playing some competitive teams, right? You played Iowa, beat them pretty handily, but played Iowa, Oregon, Nebraska. So it's like, at what point do the injuries continue to mount up and players are fatigued and you're just not seeing teams play their best? And now this is quite the environment, right? You've only had really one tough road game this season and you lost it. Now you're on the road in Happy Valley. Only shame is that this is not a 7:30 p.m. Eastern kick and it's happening at noon. But I don't know. I could see a path to Ohio State struggling here. I could also see their defensive line controlling the game against Penn State, especially with a backup quarterback. My lean is first half under, which would be about 23.5, 24. And that's kind of where I would lean on this. Again, 2 teams just kind of feeling each other out in the heavyweight bout. And could see this going punt, field goal, punt really easily.
I also have written down the first half under, but I'm not rushing to play that one. I'm honestly cool staying on the sidelines on this one. This is not a game I'm itching to get involved with. I really thought I would be looking to bet Penn State. A few weeks ago, you told me this. I was like, man, I kind of like this matchup for Penn State. I think it sets them well. Obviously, Drew Aller hurt. There was a big wrench in that. And I don't like that you're getting Ohio State off of a shaky performance. And then you also have Penn State. Not that they dominated Wisconsin, but defense shows out. They get it done, whatever, on the road. I don't like any more the setup that this game has around it. I don't think you're really getting necessarily a discount on Penn State to back them. Not that I'm rushing to lay Ohio State or anything, but just 2 weeks ago, I would have told you oh yeah, I'm going to be on Penn State. Now I've kind of cooled, injury notwithstanding. That was just my general sentiment. I look back at the Ohio State-Oregon game, and I said before that game, I was a little interested in the first half under because I didn't know if Oregon had the big play capability to take the top off of this Ohio State offense. Because if you remember, Oregon had some troubles with the offensive line. They weren't really moving the ball down the field. They obviously take the top off of Ohio State and they hit those big plays. I didn't play the first half under in that game, but that was a look I had. I shared on the podcast. It was dead wrong. I say a lot of wrong things. This time around, I agree with Ohio State, Penn State, especially if Aller's out. But I do think there are avenues to points for both sides. It's more that I think it could start slower. Maybe it's even like first quarter under or something. So I still don't necessarily believe in this Penn State secondary. I think there are some question marks there. You look at who's played them. They haven't really played the most explosive offenses. Like Illinois, Wisconsin, those aren't like high octane passing games. You mentioned Ohio State lacking the big playability, but like, when push comes to shove, you still have the dudes that could really test a secondary. I don't know if Penn State has those guys this year. I know the numbers check out pretty nicely for them, but again, I think that's somewhat schedule benefited, however the wording is. It benefited from the schedule, I guess. And on the other side, when Penn State's had to open it up, and again, this is a very Drew Aller dependent. When Penn State's had to open up the passing game, they have. The team is 5th in EPA per pass. They are at the national average in explosive pass rate. They just don't look to stretch the field much. They're averaging 7 yards per play. When they've been forced to, they have hit the deep shots. I look back to against Bowling Green. They started opening it up. Against West Virginia earlier in the year, they really started throwing it downfield. USC, of course. They really started chucking it around the yard. So if Aller's healthy, I actually find myself maybe, and it's why, like, obviously this is so dependent. If Aller's out first half under, I do agree, because I think Penn State's really going to try and lock this down, really try and play super conservative, try and chew the clock. If it's Aller, I don't know if I'm going to bet it, but I do kind of think that impacts this over. And again, there's enough game breakers on both sides. I know Penn State doesn't have the dudes that Ohio State has a receiver, but Nick Singleton's a dude. Katron Allen's a dude, and I love Andy Kotelnicki. I think there's an avenue to points there. So, again, it's contingent on the quarterback, but those are just some of my thoughts on the game.
And I could support that position as well. I think this game script could go a couple of different ways, but similar to a game that we had talked about one of the previous times that I was on before the season started was Georgia and Clemson. And somebody had mentioned liking the over. And my thought was, if you like the over, just wait, right? It's going to go punt, punt, punt. And instead of betting 49.5, you'll get 42.5 or 43 live. And this is the exact same situation, I think. I really think first quarter under could be worth a look, or maybe first half under. But this is going to go punt, punt, field goal, or punt, 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 turnover on downs, or whatever else. And you'll see something about 41.5 live. So if you like the over, I would just kind of wait and watch the first series or two, and you'll get a better number.
Yeah. I'm waiting on the Aller news.
Yes.
I don't think we're going to hear much, but we've seen in these bigger games, money continue to pour in on the under as the week goes on. We saw it with Texas, Georgia. That one ended up getting home. We saw it with Alabama, Georgia. Did not get home at all. But we've seen in these bigger games between two studly teams, the total has been driven down. Before we move on to our next game, Duck, do you have an opinion on the side? Not that you're giving out a bet, but like, do you just have any thoughts on who you like? Any opinion? Do you think like Penn State as a home dog? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, it just kind of seems like this could be culminating into, is Penn State finally over the hump, right? Big game, James. We know the record against Michigan and Ohio State. And this Penn State team, to your point, with the explosiveness when they've needed to, and their run game has been solid, the offensive line play has been exceptional. Is this the point now where they can get over that hump? And it would not surprise me at all to see them do that. The thing that I just would be concerned about is, man, it just really seems like the books are comfortable with the Penn State money, right? It's kind of weird to say this, but I'd almost like them more if the game moved to -3. And then you kind of know that the books are okay with getting a little money the other way. If I had a revolver to my head right now and I had to make a play, I would take Penn State +3.5 and feel okay about it.
Okay. We'll see. That's obviously the biggest game on the card. Another game with some college football playoff implications. Texas A&M. They are on the road. They go to South Carolina, night game against the Gamecocks, who are coming off a bye. Texas A&M obviously win the resounding comeback against LSU. Marcel Reed comes in for Connor Wegman. I mean, you want to talk about maybe the worst bet of the year. I took Connor Wegman's over passing yards prop and shared it on the podcast. That did not hit. It got benched mid-game. But A&M shows up, gets it done with Marcel Reed. So before we talk about this game, my thought, Duck, on the LSU game, I bet A&M in the game. Shared it on the pod. Liked A&M. Obviously did not get off to the start I had hoped. But again, maybe it's a lucky result. I don't know. A&M was still, LSU missed a few field goals. Again, it happens. But I do think A&M was aided. The fact that Wegman and Reed are two polar opposite quarterbacks, I think really played a serious hand in getting them to the win, because LSU, I mean, how many passes did Reed throw? 4? He just read option, just kept it going the whole way. LSU had no idea what to do. And I think it's tough for a team like that to deal with basically a completely different offense on the fly and really have to try and figure this out. They couldn't, obviously. A&M ends up running away with the game, tidal wave. I think this is a different setup, though, against South Carolina. And you've seen a ton of love for South Carolina early in the market. We're recording this on Monday night, going to be released to you on Tuesday. A&M now a 2.5-point road favorite. Total has dropped to 44.5. Duck, what are your thoughts on this game? And if Reed hasn't been named the starter yet, I'm going to assume he's going to be QB1, but I guess it's not official. But we could just talk about the game as a whole here.
Yeah, so I was watching that Texas A&M LSU game too, kind of just waiting and waiting and waiting. And what it's kind of like in college basketball when a team will make a run, it always starts with the defense, right? And getting stops. And once the Texas A&M D line started taking over and creating pressure and havoc, and the turnovers started mounting, it snowballed very, very quickly. And Texas A&M went from down 10 and couldn't move the ball to getting momentum from the defense, and bam, they're up by 17. So yeah, that was really nice play from the defense in the second half to really spark the momentum. But I mean, what in the world does this guy have to do in order to solidify the starting job, right? That was a really needed spark by Marcel Reed. Now, did he only throw 2 passes because the running game was working so well, or do they have no confidence in his decision-making to read defenses and make the accurate throws? That is to be seen. I think I've heard a lot of sharp guys that actually like South Carolina this week, and so I don't really have a strong position on this, but golly, I don't know. I'm not overly sold on what I've seen from South Carolina. I know they competed well against LSU, and they had a nice win early in the season against Kentucky, and they blew out Oklahoma, who I just frankly don't think is very good. But I don't know how they're going to be able to protect here and hold up in the trenches. So I would lean A&M. My concern here, again, is really number driven. This line opened up at 3.5, and now it's down to 2.5. So people are really inviting the A&M money. And so part of your handicapping, as you well know, is you look at the actual personnel and the matchups and who's on the roster and the traveling roster and what's going to happen on the field. You look at the coaching decisions and what goes on kind of on the sidelines. And then the third element can be the market analysis, and that can be really telling. So I'm just kind of wanting to wait and see where this line goes later on in the week. But I am concerned that it's dropping and the money continues to pour in on A&M. So that's usually not a good sign.
Yeah. If you're playing South Carolina, I mean, you're paying a serious premium. I do think that we don't have to get into like a market dynamic conversation, but I do think that some of these quote unquote like spots or these very obvious situational angles where you got A&M off a big win and everything. And look, I do think that there's a factor to that, but I think that you pay a tax for that. I think it's baked into this number that you are getting A&M off of a resounding night win. You're traveling across, you're traveling again now next week, South Carolina off of a bye. And just look at some of these recent spreads. Obviously, A&M closed about a 1.5-point favorite, implying LSU is a better team very slightly. About a few weeks ago, obviously, South Carolina competed with LSU. LSU was a 6.5-point favorite in that game. A few weeks ago, Ole Miss was a 10.5-point favorite in South Carolina. So just you're paying a really big tax here to get South Carolina. My look in this game was the under. It was above the key number of 45, so not available anymore. But to me, I don't trust South Carolina's offense at all. I'm going to talk about them in a little bit. But to me, the defense is legit. I believe that this defense is truly above average to damn near elite in the SEC, especially on the defensive line. They're 11th in tackles for loss. They are allowing 2.82 yards per carry. That's 7th in the country. I don't trust A&M's passing game. I don't think whether it's Wegman at this point or if it's Reed, I don't think that they have the game breakers to really stretch the field. They're going to try and do it through the run. So I see a lot of third down, like 3rd and 7s, 3rd and 8s, punt. You look, Reed. I mean, Reed has, I think, nearly as much time as Wegman now under center with all the injuries and stuff. Only 3 big-time throws to 2 turnover-worthy plays. So he's playing clean ball, but I wouldn't say he's lighting it up. And then on the other side, Lenora Sellers, 5 big-time throws to 9 turnover-worthy plays. I don't know that we're going to see some explosive plays in this one. And again, like you look at the LSU-South Carolina game, that game got swirly real quickly with some big plays and stuff. And South Carolina, I think, forced the issue trying to play at LSU style and they knew they had to get into a shoot. They couldn't keep down LSU's offense. That's not this game. I think it's going to be a defensive struggle. Night game. Honestly, I think the way I lose is if Beamer ball comes into play and we see a block kick or a block fumble, return touchdown, something crazy. I definitely think that's, I'm signing up for that with the bet, but I honestly think we see a really conservative game plan from both teams. And this game is, again, like played. I mentioned this earlier in the season, like A&M, I feel like wants to play these NFL style games, like 20-17, 17-4, you know what I mean? Like almost like traditional scoring games where you see it on like a Sunday. So yeah, I think it's gonna be a tight game. I don't think either team is gonna get far away. Honestly, I think A&M wins the game, but I think it's low scoring. I think you could see a world where 1st to 20 wins. Obviously, I could get egg on my face if there's some sort of block punt or something like that.
Couple things that I would look at that could support that position. So South Carolina has really struggled to protect this year. They're 124th in offensive havoc surrendered. They've given up 32 sacks while only throwing for 8 touchdown passes. Team rushing average is 3.7, and they have 1 receiver that's averaging more than 15 yards per catch. So the explosiveness has been limited, and the amount of pressure that their quarterbacks have been under. And I say quarterbacks because they played a couple of guys, primarily Sellers, but also Ashford has played some snaps. But they're just under way too much duress, and they take so many negative plays. I mean, 32 sacks surrendered at this point in the season. They're on pace to give up 50 sacks. I mean, that's a really, really bad Colorado State offensive line type number. So that could be a real problem in this one. So you're absolutely right about that. Could be a field position game. The punter play could be really important with pinning teams inside the 20. A lot of methodical offense, running the ball. The clock ticks quickly, and an under position would be a good one. Or maybe to my point, I might like a South Carolina. If I can get a team total under 21, I might look that way.
Not a bad look at all. And I just, A&M has some build. I probably should have had this in my notes, but A&M was down. I think it was, I want to say either 3 of their starting offensive linemen in that game. I'll try and drag that back and see if I can find the tweet. I know who tweeted it at least. So he's a beat reporter for Texas A&M, so I have to go back and find it. But this A&M team, they want to run the ball. They want to play bully ball. If it is going to be Reed, I think that even more supports this. And I respect Mike Elko as a coach. I think he knows night game on the road, you can't try and force the issue against a South Carolina team that really their best course is short field or something. I think that's where I lose this on a short field turnover that throws the game script out of whack is probably where I lose this one.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think you have a good position there. I think especially if you have a number that's above 45, which is a key total, and this is not just groupthink agreeing with you because I have to, right? The numbers show that both offenses allow havoc, and the defenses can get after it. The edge rushes that quarterback's going to have to get rid of it quickly or they're going to take sacks, and that's going to keep teams out of scoring range. Both teams have had to settle for field goals, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean if you get inside the 20, you're going to score 7s, right? A lot of field goals could be kicked, and you might be looking at a 19-16 type game.
So I and this is part of during the A&M LSU game, I was very concerned for A&M, but in that game, A&M lost. They were without their starting center, and now they lost both of their guards to injury in that game. So 3 starting linemen went out in that game, and they still managed to win, which is impressive. But I haven't seen an update on that, but it's definitely something to monitor, and also probably helps my under position.
Yeah.
Another game where I feel the stakes are a little similar is Louisville-Clemson, where you have Louisville trying to play a bit of spoiler here for Clemson coming off their bye week. Brutal schedule set up for Louisville, playing their 7th straight game. The Cards did get it done on Friday night. Shaky start. I mean, in reality, though, pretty clear winner against BC. They were the far better team. It was pretty much like 5 blow-up plays against BC that kind of put them behind the 8 ball and had them playing comeback mode against BC on Friday night. They do go to Death Valley, though, against Clemson, a team that is very good. I still don't want to put them in the great category yet. I don't think that this team is truly a national championship contender or anything like that. But listen, players on your schedule, and they beat the crap out of everybody pretty much. So is this a classic Jeff Brom, spoiler makers, but in Louisville now, whatever, the spoiler Cards, whatever you want to call them, Spoilerville against Clemson? Or is there just too much firepower? Because I do think this Clemson passing game has really taken some serious strides, and that's the weak point of this Louisville defense.
Yeah, and I have the spot again, like you'd mentioned, Clemson off the bye, Louisville off now several max efforts, even though they were likely clearly the better team against Boston College. I mean, that's another max effort, grind out the win. Similar in a loss against Miami, Virginia, SMU. I mean, they've had so many tough games ever since really week 3 against Georgia Tech. And so how much fuel do they have left in the tank, or are they kind of running on fumes? So my concern for Clemson is the defense has struggled at finishing drives. The defense has surrendered some points, especially late in games. And so that could keep the back door open, which I am not thrilled about seeing that. Louisville has protected the quarterback pretty well here. So while Clemson has a really good pass rush, I'm not sure that they're going to get home. And if they can't get home, that would be of concern, because Louisville has several legitimate receivers that can make plays and can kind of throw it around here. So the Clemson back end is really going to be tested in this one, I believe. Tyler Show, solid passer. The run game is solid, which typically travels well. I really do wonder. It kind of feels like Louisville is just kind of hanging onto the rope, and their hands are slipping, and their hands are getting sore with the rope burn, and they're squeezing and trying to hold on, and they're almost to the end. And this could be the end, right? Like, I was kind of low on Clemson, as we discussed before the week 1 preview. But they have really proven me wrong this year. And Clemson is very much a legitimate ACC contender. Again, I don't know that they're going to win the playoff, but Clemson is really dialed in, and it is not a train that I want to step in front of. And so I would lay it. I would lay the 10.5.
Yeah, I haven't bet this myself, but I honestly, Clemson team total in like the mid-ish 30s. Something I've noticed with Clemson is gas pedal. This team is running it up on teams. This team wants to keep starters in the game and really try and pour it on. I've seen Klubnik play into the second half, fourth quarter, whatever, against Wake Forest when they're up by 1 million. Florida State, they were even moving the ball. They settled for field goals, but they were still trying to move the ball and stuff. And you just go through pretty much since the Georgia game where they scored 3 points, totals 66. This is just them. 66, 59, 40, 29, 49, 48. That's a lot of points. Louisville, listen, if Louisville shows up and they get their passing game going, which I think is legit, like you mentioned, Duck, that's only more reason for Clemson to keep this up. Louisville, overall, I mean, defense is mid. They're allowing 2.5 points per drive, 66 in the EPA per play, outside top 100 in both explosive rush and pass defense. I don't really think there's going to be much resistance here, and I think we could see a bit of a Clemson tidal wave here. I think probably the way I would prefer to play it is Clemson team total over.
Yeah, I like it. And to be honest with you, if you even look at the one number there that was smaller, which was the Florida State game, they scored 29. They had 500 total yards of offense, 28 first downs to 14, no turnovers, and did have to settle for 5 field goals. And the length of those field goals, they were all pretty short, right? 26 yards, 25 yards, 24 yards, 31 yards. I mean, that could have been 49-13 very easily. And so they've really ratcheted it up. And I like that a lot, actually. So gonna hit the submit button on that one as well.
That one is certainly on the short list for this week. Indiana goes to East Lansing, optimistic that Curtis Rourke is going to be back from a thumb surgery, minor surgery, missed a week against Washington. So I had the under in the game, was way too sweaty for what was actually going on in that game. But again, as someone who loved Indiana preseason, I now find myself just not believing in this team as much anymore. Winning obviously is impressive, but the market, I think this team can't keep covering. That being said, as someone who circled, doing my notes Saturday night, Sunday morning, waiting for the spreads to come out, I was like, okay, like I could bet Sparty. I'm gonna hope like maybe we get close to double digits or something like that. 7.5 feels really cheap, especially if they're getting Curtis Rourke back against a Sparty team that makes a lot of mistakes, that is off of a loss to a rival. I'm no longer actively looking to get involved with Sparty. I honestly think like maybe it's like a round robin piece or something, because I do think Sparty plays up and down, but I don't know. This is an Indiana team that closed 5 or so against Washington at home, and now they're on the road and they're only laying 7.5 against a Sparty team that I think is a pretty big step down from Washington. So again, like that spot stuff, I think it's baked in pretty good here for Mich State. I think that they're not really giving you much to bet Sparty. I think you're paying quite a premium here. What do you see, Duck?
Yeah, I mean, Michigan State off the rival loss in a game that they were in pretty much till the end, but has been fairly impressive this season under Jonathan Smith. I mean, they've really hung in there outside of that Ohio State game. They were really very competitive with Oregon in a 3-touchdown loss, but I mean, there was 2 drives early. They couldn't punch it in, and in the red zone twice with no points. Beat Iowa handily. I mean, just destroyed Iowa. And so what I am really interested in is Curtis Rourke coming back, because that is something that I think eventually will rear its ugly head. It didn't rear its ugly head against Washington, but it
probably should have. Indiana should have lost that game. Indiana did not deserve that win. Sorry, I'll say it.
Or certainly not the cover, I wouldn't think.
No.
I also, I don't know. Is there any chance at all that the game Indiana really, really wants to win is next week? Right? Hosting Michigan, a chance to really put their thumb on a team that's beaten them up pretty badly for 25 years. Like, I just wonder, is there any of that going on? Now, Curt Cignetti is obviously a new coach in the league, so there could be none of that going on, and they win, and he covers a lot of numbers. And so it's just hard to step in front of that. But it's Indiana on the road. Backup quarterback situation would really be a tough thing, in my opinion, to have to go into that environment in a game that Michigan State would feel like they would have to have every chance to win. I mean, they feel right there about their chances about it. So just be real interesting game to see. I think it's, again, one of those lines, right, where this line opened at 6.5, and it just seemed like the books were real comfortable with getting that Indiana money to pour in, right? It's like if you wanted the Michigan State money and just waited for some buyback, you'd open that at 7.5 or 8, get all the MSU money, and then let that line come down, and then let the Indiana players come into the line at 7. But they were okay with that 6.5 money, so that leads me to believe this one might be tight.
Michigan State 2 weeks ago, you mentioned they kicked the shit out of Iowa. They were 7-point home dogs in that game. Now they're only 7.5 against Indiana. I don't know. I'm not betting Indiana, that's for sure. But I don't know if I could get to Sparty again. Maybe it's money line, forget the points type thing. I don't know. I just feel like you're paying such a premium to get Sparty, a team that has seemingly been addicted to shooting themselves in the foot with stupid turnovers and poor special teams play and stuff like that. So we'll see though, because I do think that this was a spot I had circled for fading the Hoosiers. I don't know. I just feel like we're paying a real premium here. And something I noticed from the Indiana game last week was the team the defensive line is so, whatever it is, they get a great push. And this Michigan State team, 122nd in terms of turnovers lost. The run game isn't consistent. The offensive line is real shaky. That was always going to be one of their toughest parts of the offense going into Jonathan Smith's first year. It's way below what he wants. Obviously, it's year one. But that was something that stuck out to me, and maybe that's where this game can be decided.
Yeah, the one last thing I'll say, too, is MSU quarterback Childs is so up and down, right? He can dazzle you, and he can just make some really terrible plays too, and far too often extend it. So he'll have to be real crisp in this one to keep them in it.
Yep. Before we open up the board for the remainder of the Week 10 card, let me tell you about the sponsor of today's show, and that's Rithmm. Rithmm is the newest and best app in the sports betting industry. Rithmm is an AI-generated sports betting modeling app that lets you get in on the sports betting action. I use Rithmm. Thousands of different users use Rithmm to create their own sports betting model. I have my pressure run model, went 5-1 on over-unders last week. I'll share an over-under from this week on my pressure run model. Why not? Let's go with Wyoming, New Mexico, under 59.5. My pressure run model is projecting 57.5 total points in that one. You could get AI-generated insights from Rithmm by signing up in the podcast description below and getting started today. All right, Duck, so let's open up the board here. With 9 weeknight games, I thought maybe we'll try and go rotation order, kind of, maybe talk some of the weeknight games and whatever you got a word on. I'll give you first game, though. Anything stick out to you on the weeknight card?
Yeah, Sam Houston State at home tomorrow night, getting their quarterback back. Their backup quarterback, Jace Bauer, has been really handicapping the team in a bad way. Can't throw the ball, and they just have had no offensive punch with him in there. And so the word is that starting quarterback, Hunter Watson, is coming back. He's much more dynamic and adds a lot of value to what their team wants to do, both throwing the ball and in the run department. So I am not convinced that that Louisiana Tech is any good. I mean, they're 2-2 in league play, but beating UTEP and Middle Tennessee is a much different task than Sam Houston. I actually think Sam Houston has the goods to run the table and get to the conference championship game. And it's a team I'm pretty high on. And so I like the way their defense has played. And getting their quarterback Watson back will be really, really a lift for this team. So I'm on the Bearcats tomorrow night, -9.5. And so that's the first one for Tuesday.
Yeah, Watson, I believe, at least before last week, he was the leading rusher as well as the leading passer, big play threat. And Louisiana Tech I don't think is very good. If Watson is back, and I think that was the expectation, this number would definitely indicate he's back. Maybe over. I don't know if I trust the La Tech offense to do much, but the defense has showed up for them, but I think that's really schedule dependent more than anything. They've played it just nobody. They haven't played a team that's inside the top 80, I believe, in EPA per play on offense. So I don't hate the play at all. Also,
and just one last thing real quick on your total there. You're still getting Sam Houston totals priced for the horror show that we saw the first 6 games of last year where they were scoring 0, 3, 6. It's just a totally different offense. So if you get totals priced in the low 40s on Sam Houston, I've been inclined to go over. Now, I want Hunter Watson in there or you'll get a result like last week. But they are not the weak, conservative, slow-paced offensive team that we saw the first half of last year. I would tell anyone who's considering that, go watch the film on Sam Houston. They're a real offensive team this year.
Yeah, this is a team that could definitely move the ball with relative ease. And again, I think that Louisiana Tech has somewhat benefited from a easy schedule, we'll call it. And yeah, I mean, pace should be not necessarily overly fast. Sam Houston, a little bit below national average. La Tech, a little above national average. But I just think, I mean, you don't need much for 45.5, 46 to go over. So that's something I'm considering. Make sure you're checking out the betstamp at RW33 for if I add that. Also on Tuesday, though, a total I whiffed on the open. Texas State, Louisiana. There's wind in the forecast that I guess I didn't see. Maybe that's what's driving this down. But I played over. I really like it at 58.5. I think two teams that are relying on its offense that are both big play threats, both on both sides for both offenses. And Louisiana, the defense, I'm just not impressed with whatsoever. You look at some of these metrics for their defense, and the offense has completely let them off the hook, scoring 33 or more in all but one game against Power 4 competition. On the defensive side of the ball, though, Louisiana checks in 124th in sacks, 132nd in tackles for loss, 123rd in havoc. And this is a Texas State team that they're aggressive. They go for it a lot. Jordan McLeod's going to put the ball in harm's way, but this Louisiana team isn't going to make you pay. Teams get in the red zone, teams are scoring. Louisiana, 127th in red zone touchdown percentage allowed. That's 127th in the country. Texas State, I think their defense is better. Texas State is underwhelmed a little bit. A streaky team, no doubt. I honestly like them. I think that they're a pretty decent bet here. But I went for the over, though, because I do think Louisiana's offense has proven it could score on pretty much everybody. I think this is a veteran offensive line that I think could test the Texas State defense that lets up a lot of big plays. And, I think this total, I peg it way higher. I think this total should be in the 60s.
Yeah, it would only have come down, and it would only possibly stay under, in my opinion, because of the weather. And so oftentimes when your listeners might be handicapping a weather play, it's not just enough to have light rain, and really even snow is not indicative or conducive to producing unders. It's all wind driven. And so the wind in this one has a sustained 15 to 18 miles an hour with 28 to 30 mile an hour gusts. And so that would qualify, in my opinion, enough wind to facilitate an under. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the game's going to go under, but if you're just looking
by the market, would be like big interest in the under.
Yeah. So the problem I have, and I really want to love the high flying Texas State overs, but I just have not seen them. I mean, they've just been so kind of disinterested in the second half. Against Old Dominion, it was just such a gross performance in their previous game. And then even against Arkansas State, it just looked like just kind of going through the motions. The other thing about that is that their defense shut Arkansas State down in the second half. So it'd be real interesting to see. Louisiana has had some pretty solid performances in their last couple games against App State and Coastal Carolina. I don't know what we're going to get with Louisiana either, though, right? Like, just one of those teams where, yeah, they've played an okay schedule and they've played kind of some weaker defenses, which maybe Texas State would qualify for that too. I want to know where Texas State's head's at, though, because this team before the season was projected to be 10-2, 11-1, talking college football playoff, and they've got 3 losses, and they 3 games they probably could have won. I mean, probably should have won the Arizona State game and the Sam Houston. I know they should have won the Sam Houston game. They blew an 18-point lead late. So, and it's maybe a stay away for me. I would only caution if there was no wind and this was played in a dome. Yeah, I would certainly say take the over. But with 25 to 30 mile an hour gusts, that would keep me off of the total.
Louisiana does play at a slow tempo, which also isn't helping my case. I know I'm pointing out a lot of flaws in it, but to me, it's more just the uber efficiency of both offenses that I think are going to dominate this game and really get this one home. And I just think that they're going to get into scoring chances and they're going to score. These are two teams that, I mean, Texas State averaging 3 points per drive. That's 16th in the country. Louisiana, 3.37. That's 9th in the country. I just think they're going to convert on scoring chances, which if that's what it is, fuck time of possession and fuck how long it takes them to snap the ball. Like, they're going to score. So this is one I circled, and, maybe the wind kills me on this one, but, that's still maybe next time I'll just check the weather forecast a little bit more. So I'll live with it on the Texas State over Duck, anything else on the weeknight that jumps out to
you? I think the Liberty-Jacksonville State game will be real interesting. Jacksonville State's been just destroying teams ever since Tyler Huff's gone in at quarterback. They've really found something there. He's banged up and questionable. So it'll be real interesting to see what the status of Huff is in that one. If he plays, I would back Jacksonville State. Liberty, in my opinion, is unbettable. And not only unbettable, but I mean, it's inexcusable what we saw last week. They're the best team in the conference. They're the presumably best team in the conference favorite to win the league, and they go down there and play that stinker team in Kennesaw State, and they can't move the football and can't get a first down and can't complete a pass against the Owls' vaunted back seven. I mean, it was just unbelievable football to watch. And so I don't think Liberty's very good. I will actually look to fade them the rest of the way against big numbers. But I will fade them on Wednesday if Huff is playing.
Yeah, you need Huff in. If Huff's out, I personally think it's a pretty substantial downgrade.
It is a downgrade for sure.
Yeah.
Another thing too, in the American Conference on Thursday. Now, I love Army and Navy more than anybody in the country. I love Armed Forces football, and we have both ridden these teams a lot this year. So we're fan favorites, and so is our wallet. But is Tulane the best team in the league?
Oh yeah,
I mean,
like with some space too. Like Navy, like in the Army, like it's a good story. It's good, but like real team, Tulane is legit. I got to map this out. I want to bet Tulane to make the playoff. I saw like 10-1, and I know that like Boise has the inside track, but if Boise loses another game, Tulane's getting in, not UNLV. It's going to be Tulane.
Yeah, for sure. It would have to be Tulane. Out, the MAC is out, and very certain the Sun Belt is out with all the teams that have the chaos there. So yeah, it would have to be Tulane or Boise/UNLV.
For Tulane, I'd like a flat 55 on over, but I might just take the team total over. This team is a wagon. This team is blowing teams out. You look at some of their score lines between Mekhi Hughes and Darian Mensah. They're chucking the ball around the yard. Charlotte, they're not really prone to limiting the explosive offense. I mean, even like Memphis. Yeah, Memphis slogged through that game, and they still got 33. So I think Tulane, what is that, like 35.5? I could see the Green Wave scoring 5 touchdowns and a field goal.
Yeah, I could too. I was real impressed with San Diego State on Saturday night. They had a game plan defensively. Their defense is terrible, and Wazoo could not solve it. And so I'll be real interested to just see. It's a big number. They have history of playing Boise State very close, and I'll just be real interested to see if San Diego State can pull another one where they keep a game real close and kind of pack it in there and then have a chance to be in it late. Boise State, obviously far superior, but this is kind of an exhale spot for them. So just kind of one of those where maybe San Diego State can bring it. I wouldn't necessarily bet on it, but I was just real interested with their performance against who I think is a really pretty solid Washington State team. And San Diego State, I mean, was in firm control in the second half and blew the win. So,
yeah, I had the over in that game, landed a half-point short. Yeah, that was a brutal end game. But one game I got for Friday night, Georgia State traveling to Stores to take on UConn. I like the Panthers plus 7.5. I actually think this move to Zach Gibson at quarterback, we've seen now 2 games in a row, 2 above average EPA per play games relative to games last season. So we're seeing this Georgia State team starting to put it together on offense. And you look at who UConn's played, just nobody all season long. And I actually think there's a case to be made that this is Georgia State's maybe easiest opponent of the season. If you go through their schedule, this is a team that has shown they could play with higher caliber competition, and UConn doesn't even qualify for that. Beat Vanderbilt on the field. This team is starting to compete a little bit better. UConn beats Rice with its backup by 7, can't move the ball at all. Now we're expected to upgrade them against a Georgia State team that is arguably better than Rice anyway. Like, I'm just not sure where this number is conceived from. And on the same token, Georgia State closes like an 8-ish point underdog against App, covers, and now is UConn and App, they're relatively the same. Like maybe like something. I think UConn's getting a really nice analytical profile or statistical profile where I don't know if that's really justified. So I took the points with Georgia State. I think Gibson gives them another dimension on offense with the run game.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder why they waited so long to go to Gibson, right? I think he's the better player, and I just don't understand what took so long. And so, yeah, the move is going to be likely one that'll result in significant offensive performance. And it's kind of one of those things, too, where the team can kind of rally around the backup and play inspired football. And the only real question I would have is, do they still kind of feel like they're kind of in it for this season, and can they make a bowl game? 2-5, maybe. It's just hard when teams eventually run out of the motivation, right? Other than just playing young guys and building towards next year. And when you got a team that has lost 4 in a row, like this is kind of the week where it's like, if they are going to do it, it's going to be this week. Otherwise, I mean, they'll get blitzed next week at James Madison, and then fall off the once they're eliminated from bowl contention. It's, well, let's play for next year. So, yeah, I think if they're going to have a real inspiring performance and kind of give themselves hope to make a bowl game, it'll unquestionably be this week against UConn. So it'll be a real interesting game, and a team that really, really blasted UConn last year. Now, it's not always the same thing year to year, but they have history of winning on the field against UConn. So at least a little familiarity with the opponent helps.
Yeah. Let's move to Saturday. Anything that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I mean, interesting game between Stanford and NC State. I think Stanford is just a terrible football team right now, and now you're coming across the country after a really tough loss against Wake Forest in a game that you would have thought was kind of winnable. Prior to that, getting blitzed by SMU, getting blitzed by Notre Dame, getting blitzed by Virginia Tech. Just one left, and I really can't see a real spirited effort going across the country for a 9 a.m. local time kickoff at NC State, noon Eastern, 9 o'clock Pacific. It's kind of one of those that I don't know why the line is coming down or who's putting money on the Cardinal, but yeah, I'm on NC State.
I lean NC State as well. Haven't fired yet, but NC State, I would say, is trending up for sure with CJ Bailey. It seems like it's starting to come together a little bit. They also had a bye week to get straight. Let's just talk about Stanford's schedule here. So you remember like what feels like an eternity ago when they upset Syracuse on that Friday night? Okay, so that was they were off a bye that week, so good for them. They went home, came back, played at Clemson. Ashton Daniels got hurt. They returned home, got blitzed by Vatech, went on the road, got curb stomped by Notre Dame, returned home, got decleated by SMU, stayed home, lost a heartbreaker to Wake Forest. Now you're back on the road for, like you mentioned, a 9 a.m. local kick against the Wolfpack off a bye. I guess with a lower total, you're really asking a lot of this NC State offense to do the heavy lifting and really dictate this game. I haven't bet it myself, but it would only be NC State for me. And like maybe this is NC State kind of long year. I think CJ Bailey's coming into his own, and maybe they kind of beat the crap out of a team, which they haven't done all year.
Just kind of feels like that's the position they have to be in this week. Another interesting one here. Call me a sucker. I've been on them almost every week this season, but I mean, you can't give Vanderbilt 6.5 points, can you? Are you nuts?
So I saw Diego Pavia is a little banged up, and he got hurt in the Texas game.
Yep.
So
came back in.
I see some 7s if you look around. It would be Vandy or nothing because I don't know what Auburn's really playing for. My issue is as someone who bet Vandy last week against Texas. And look, if someone's going to give you turnovers, it's going to be Auburn. But I don't want to say it was fluky because it was a competitive game. But Vandy did force a handful of turnovers that kept that game from getting off the rails. They got a pick on the first drive that set up the first touchdown drive that got them up 7-0. They had a fumble recovery down 2 scores to then score again and make it 1 score again. It was a turnover-driven cover, which happens. This is a turnover-driven defense. But, and again, Auburn may give it to you. I haven't gotten to the window just yet, though, especially if Pavia's banged up. That's a little nerve-wracking. And, like, you'd think Hugh Freeze is going to say this isn't happening again, right?
Well, if it does, it'll be 3 years in a row because they did it while he was at Liberty. They did it last year at Auburn, and now this would be the 3rd year in a row that he gets Pavia'd. So as long as Pavia is in there, I mean, this team is still – they're still going to give max efforts because they're going to want to make a bowl game. That's a really important thing in a program like Vanderbilt. You look at Florida State, it's like, if we miss a bowl game, who really cares? We don't want to go play in the Pinstripe Bowl in New York City anyway. But for Vanderbilt, like, this is a huge deal for them, a team that was projected regular season win 2.5, and they can have a chance to get to a bowl game. Monumental for that program. So I still think the motivation will be really high. And like you said, for Auburn, it's like, what the heck are these guys playing for at this point? They don't care.
So
yeah.
I preface by saying this. I never get Old Dominion right. I faded them under win total the last 2 years. They are going to go over for the 2nd straight year. I bet them in the bowl game against Western Kentucky that they famously blew in the famous Oats Bowl or whatever. I like ODU this weekend against Appalachian State. App State is dead last in the country in EPA per rush. The only thing Old Dominion does is run the ball at a high clip, especially since going to quarterback Colton Joseph, who has ran for 60 or more yards in 4 straight games. Overall, the Monarchs are top 40 in EPA per rush. They just absolutely ran laps around Georgia Southern. Overall, this Old Dominion team is just trending upwards. App State still can't seem to find their footing this season. Unfortunately, obviously, the hurricane situation isn't doing them any favors, but all year this defense has been a sieve. I like ODU. The opener at Circa was crazy at 3. I can't bet at Circa, but cheap money line. I think Old Dominion's the better team. I'm not attributing much home field for App. I think ODU just blitzes them on the ground. And how about the ODU defense? This defense is nasty. Shutting down James Madison. Shutting down James Madison. Shutting down Bowling Green. This Old Dom defense overall, I mean, right at the national average in EPA per play, 36 in points per drive allowed, 11th in tackles for loss. This is an awesome defense, and I don't really trust App State to consistently keep up with, compared to ODU's offense. So I laid a cheap money line with ODU on the road.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you mentioned the hurricane situation. It's really very unfortunate circumstances for the people there in Western North Carolina. And App State had not played a home game since that terrible event happened, and they were at home last week. And so
they were home last week.
They were at home last week. And so last week was the real spirited effort for their home fans to kind of bring back some joy to that community in Boone, which was devastated by that. And so could it be 2 weeks in a row? Yeah, it's possible. But very, very frequently you'll see a big, real spirited effort in front of the home fans. And then the week after is like, okay, you're kind of back to who you are. And my goodness, I mean, Old Dominion – 3 wins in a row as closing dogs, and really lights out performances for much of the season, right? They hung right in there with South Carolina. They were in that Virginia Tech game for a while, went and beat Bowling Green, who I have a ton of respect for. I mean, Old Dominion is a play on the rest of the season, in my opinion.
I agree. What else you like?
So this is kind of a gross game, and it's really a gross team, but I'm laying it with Oklahoma this week. 34.5. I would play it now because it's going to close about 39.5. But they're hosting FCS CAA participant Maine, and Maine is going to be so undersized in the trenches that Oklahoma is not really going to have to do a whole heck of a lot at home other than run the football and play your base defense. And Maine turns the ball over a lot in FCS play. They have no ability to cover these receivers for Oklahoma or really defend against the run. I mean, Oklahoma can put up as many points as they want here. So play the team total over and lay the points because this should be 51-7.
Yeah, good. Take out your frustrations after a tough year for the
Mhm.
Sooners for sure. I got some gross ones. I just want to make sure that the line didn't move. Okay, Tulsa UAB. It's a pretty gross card. You're starting to get into the dregs of the season where the bigger games are starting to get a little fewer and far between. But I like Tulsa UAB over 58. Both teams have played fairly difficult schedules, both in conference and out of conference. Both defenses are just god awful. And both offenses aren't much better. But I would say where this bet goes wrong is failed red zone opportunities. But both teams top 50 in tempo and pass play percentage. And I do think UAB was onto something with Kitna coming in. Played the week before against South Florida. They put up 25 points. Not much. This offense has fallen off definitely from last year, but with a bye, maybe this team comes to life a little bit. And Tulsa, they definitely showed some life in that stunning comeback against UTSA.
Unbelievable.
Unbelievable comeback, down like 38-7.5, and they come back and win outright in regulation. They do have some game breakers themselves. Cooper Laga has actually been rock solid, and Camden Benjamin, their wide receiver, that guy's a dude. Definitely someone to keep an eye on. I think he's a sophomore, so maybe he's going to transfer up to a Power 5 level. But I think with pace and a lot of passes and really bad defenses, I mean, these two defenses are, and this is like your shitty defense of the week matchup here. UAB allowing nearly 4 points per drive. They're 118th in EPA per play. Tulsa is worse. They're 120th in EPA per play. Both teams are just big play funnels. I just think there's going to be points here. And this is like a pretty pedestrian, like above average total at 58. I just think there's an avenue to big plays left and right, broken tackles, like stupid game, a lot of variance. So I went with the over there in Tulsa UAB.
Yeah, and Tulsa now gets a little bit of momentum off of that miracle win and looking to ride the wave. I mean, I guess they're kind of still playing for some bowl eligibility as well. So I could see a real spirited effort from them. They should be able to throw the ball all over UAB, who just can't. It's like 11 folding chairs out there on defense. They're just so stinking bad. But the offense has actually shown some life with Kitna, like you had mentioned. Even going back to the Army game, right? They lost 44-10. They didn't cover the team total. They didn't cover the number, and the game didn't go over. But they had 3 first-half possessions inside the 10-yard line that resulted in 0 points. That's not going to happen against Tulsa. They'll cash those in there. I totally see this as like 42-35 type game, comfortably over the 58.
Yeah, I know where it failed red zone trips is where I lose, like stupid mistakes like that when they get into scoring position. But I think with pace, and especially like if you're betting it over with two teams that are like heavy pass, I do think that it helps you avoid some of those mistakes, because the clock with inefficiency, you're going to see the clock stop, as opposed to like if you get stuffed on a run, the clock starts to run a little bit more. So if the ball's hitting the ground, I like that more for an over. It gives you more shots at, scores and everything. So that was one that stuck out to me early in the week. Duck, I'm almost tapped out. I got one more game I want to bring up to you, but anything else jump out to you before we get out of here?
Yeah, so we just saw the putrid performance last week at noon on ABC, and Navy flubbed the game against Notre Dame. I think they're going to play really inspired football on the road against Rice. Rice just fired their head coach, and their quarterback, E.J. Warner, is questionable for the matchup against Navy, and the drop-off to the number 2 guy is very significant. And so you just saw the nerves with Navy. You saw them play really not terrible football, but they just turned the ball over and were just made uncharacteristic Navy mistakes. That gets corrected this week. I've got Navy on the margin call. So I've got a big play on -12, but I also took -20 and -26 alt totals for the margin call for Navy.
There we go. And then one more. So the number's not there anymore, so it's not a bet necessarily, but one game I want to bring up, Illinois, Minnesota. I know we kind of went like dumpster diving here, but there are some conference games out with some interesting stakes, and Minnesota's starting to turn this around. But this is one, I guess, like my bet regret of last week was not playing the Minnesota-Maryland over, because, and this won't make sense in my handicap, and maybe I'm a week late on it, but the total isn't adjusting at all. So I think Minnesota's defensive metrics are completely overblown. if you look at their strength of schedule, especially defending the pass. So Minnesota this season grades out as the 19th best defense in terms of EPA per pass, and they're a top 15 unit in terms of coverage grading. But if you look at who they've played this season, they really haven't played a really good passing offense. The only one they have played is USC. But if you remember, there were 30-mile-an-hour wind gusts in that game, and USC couldn't throw the ball. So I need to subjectively adjust in my head that, okay, this team hasn't really played a serious passing game. Played Maryland last week, who isn't elite by any means, but they have some dudes in Prather and Felton with Billy Edwards that makes it above average passing game. While Edwards did throw a pick six that helped get the scoreline moving, Maryland moved the ball through the air. They now travel to Champaign to play Illinois, who I know is traveling back from Oregon, but this is an Illinois offense that is top 20 in EPA per pass for most of this season. The offensive line has some issues, but Minnesota isn't generating a lot of pressure this season. Top 30 in explosive pass rate with the likes of Zachary Franklin and hopefully Pat Bryant, who is in concussion protocol, but Bielema was cautiously optimistic he can play. Luke Altmaier's made some serious strides this season. That makes me confident that this Illini passing game can hum. And on the other side, I don't know how good Illinois' defense really is. Any offense with a pulse has moved the ball on them and scored with relative ease. Is Minnesota's offense starting to turn into something? On the ground, Darius Taylor looks healthy. This Illinois defensive line is surprisingly much softer than you would think given prior years. 132nd in defensive line yards, 111th in EPA per rush allowed. So I actually think both teams, again, total at 45 you could find. I played 44.5. So sure, you know what? I'll add to the card, 45. You don't need much to get over this. And last year, when both these teams were struggling on offense, they played. Total was the exact same, 44.5. So you're not really getting an upgrade for what I think are two better offenses compared to last year. We've seen these Big Ten low totals start to really trend over. I like over here. I mean, what? I need essentially 3 touchdowns each, more or less, and then a field goal, something like that, like 3-ish touchdowns each. I think I could get that. Even with a few low possession game, I think this game could go over.
Yeah, and the other thing you're going to need is when you think about Minnesota, you're so used to just being conditioned to watching run, punt, run, incomplete pass, punt. And Minnesota, for the first couple of years under PJ, were running it 2-1. Not the case this year. They're throwing the ball a lot more, and they're having success with Brosmer at quarterback. And so it's one thing that I like to see on a team that's kind of changing or adapting their identity to the strength of their players. And so I like the fact that they're throwing the ball. It's 50-50 run pass, and so that certainly helps. The other thing you've got is you have defenses that allow their opponents to convert on third down. So one thing that's really tough when you're trying to facilitate an over between two kind of middling offenses and two kind of above average defenses is if the teams are just completely locked down and only allow 31% on third down, well, you're going to see a lot of punts because those teams rise up on third down defense. Not the case this year. Both these teams are allowing 45, 46% on third down. And so what that allows the offenses to do is continue to stay on the field, move the ball into scoring position. The only problem here will be is if these teams can punch it in and score touchdowns in the red zone rather than settling for field goals. The red zone defense appears to be okay for Illinois. They've allowed 16 touchdowns in 26 attempts. Minnesota is 11 for 17. So they're forcing some teams to attempt field goals a little bit. But you know what? We're also to the point in the season where these two teams are going to start to go for it, right? They're going to forgo the field goal in a game that's really important for both. So I think you'll see you'll certainly have chances to get points, right? These teams will work it into the red zone. They'll be aggressive. The defenses will help facilitate that with some poor third down play. And really, like you had mentioned, in a game with a total of 45, you really need one scoring burst, right? You'll get that burst of like touchdown right before half. And that's kind of where that will kind of be decided. So, yeah, I could see both of these third down defenses not playing up to par and each of these teams having plenty of red zone chances. So, yeah, I would take it over there.
Any other ones? I'm pretty much tapped out.
Let's look real quick here at one more. Yeah, it's kind of a unique card, and it's really unique that we do not have an 11 o'clock or 10:30 p.m. Eastern
Oh,
kick this week. Only
for
8
me,
o'clock. So.
I could get some sleep this week. I'm still trying to catch up from last Saturday. These Colorado late night kicks really get you going.
Or Hawaii in my
Yeah,
case.
no, Hawaii I've ruled out. They don't. That one I've said I'll check the box score in the morning. That one I've said no thank you to.
I'll say, would it surprise you at all if Oklahoma State has quit?
No,
Would it surprise you at all if Arizona State off the bye, getting Levitt back with Scattaboo and a pretty solid Big 12 style defense? I mean, would it really surprise you at all if they kind of go in there and kind of lay the wood?
Yeah, so I'm not going to give out a number that doesn't exist because I played like a cheap money line on Arizona State. They're now looking at 3.
Yeah, it opened 1.
I still think that's good. It would not surprise me. Ollie Gordon got hurt for a second straight game. Would not surprise me if he sits now. Bowman continues to like play lackadaisical ball. Oklahoma State's tackling has just fallen off a cliff. Yeah, I think ASU just comes in buttoned up and takes care of business. I like ASU quite a bit as well. Now, like at this point, like maybe pair that with something else you like a bigger favorite money line type idea, something like that. But I think ASU is like way good. I make them 3.5 with Levitt. So I'm already like on them. It's more, do I really, the price is starting to get correct. But like to me, Oklahoma State is like a dead fade now. They had their one game against BYU. That was kind of their last stand, I think.
Yeah, and then there's just not a lot of other marquees, right? We kind of hit all the marquees, and so I mean, you could try to make a case to get talked into something on Oregon at Michigan, but I just don't think Michigan's bettable.
No, Oregon, they're through 14 now, right? They're like 15.
It was 15.5, has come back down to 14.5. So yeah, Oregon minus 14.5, totals 45.
Yeah, it would be Oregon or nothing for me. I think Michigan pretty fortunate to get the outcome they did against Michigan State. I don't necessarily buy Davis Warren as an actual threat. And, look, this Michigan defensive line is obviously havoc driven, but it really looks like this Oregon passing game is starting to click a little bit. It seemed like it took some time. I think Gabriel can play a clean game and they could get out of there with a win. Now, are they looking to run it up? Or are they, hey, we got a few more games here traveling back and forth before, because they have a really late bye. This was actually part of why I liked Oregon to win the Big Ten before the season. We'll see if they actually do it. But if you look, they have a late bye week. I believe it's the second to last week of the regular season before they host Washington.
Mm-hmm.
So they almost get like a mini bye week before the Big Ten title game, where you got like the likes of Ohio State and Penn State, maybe a little bit more worse for wear, not as well rested. So that was part of what got me to I liked Oregon anyway, but it was just like another factor in helping drive me to that decision. So I could see Oregon getting up comfortable and like maybe Michigan hangs around the number, but ultimately I'm not sure Michigan has the firepower to string together enough drives to really keep this one close. Like if Oregon gets to like 20, don't they just win? Like, isn't the game over?
Yeah, I mean,
not to cover, just to win the
points
game.
will win the game. Both teams won't be over 21. I don't think Michigan can get there. So yeah, I would say
that's my concern for taking Oregon to cover. I lean that way, and it was something I had jotted down. I got to circle back to it, but like, are they interested in laying it on them and running it up? Maybe they are, because defending national champs, Michigan kind of seems to get a decent effort from everybody. Does Oregon have bigger fish to fry, and they get up and Michigan gets one backdoor? Like this hangs around like 17-20, and then Michigan punches one in late. I doubt it, but I guess it's possible.
Really, the only other one that interests me is we got armed forces battle between Air Force and Army, and Air Force is just so bad. And so Army they're off a bye, but previous game was East Carolina, and The Army got up so big and then started playing reserve players in the second half. And East Carolina does have a pretty solid passing attack, and they were a pretty proud bunch and didn't give up in that game, scored 4 touchdowns in the second half, which was good to see because I was on East Carolina plus 17.5. Yep. But you look prior to that, UAB, Tulsa, Temple, Rice, FAU, all blowouts. And Air Force, just even though they're somewhat familiar with the scheme, they do not have the horses to run their style of the triple option. I mean, they're getting no push on the offensive line. They have no explosiveness in the A or B back position. They can't convert third down. They're getting absolutely zero push this year on offense. I mean, they could barely get a first down against Colorado State. They're converting third downs at 33%. It's really rough to watch Air Force this year. They've only been in the red zone 15 times for the entire season, and 3 of those attempts were against Merrimack. I mean, it's just an offense that's not generating enough, and Army's not going to stop. I don't think. I think that in this situation, it's not enough. You have to play it with Army if you want to play this game, because you can't count on Air Force to score any more than 7, and so. I would lay it with Army. I think it's going to be real similar to what the Navy team did against Air Force. And the big difference there is Air Force was at home in that blowout loss, and now they're on the road and their season's just toast. So the troubling spot for Army will be at North Texas. North Texas will give Army a game next week.
Over.
Yep. Oh,
totally
without question.
Yeah, that totally going to be
away from the listeners for next week. Anything 68 or so, you have to go.
Yeah, you can't make those totals high enough. I was looking at Tulane, North Texas last week, and I was like, man, 65.5. Someone got that at open. Like, good for you. Like, I was looking at like 60, and I'm like, man, I still could get there. And then it like closed like 70. It was absurd. But Duck, thank you so much for your time. As always, you're the man. Appreciate everything you've done for the show. Great insight as always. Please tell everyone about where they can find your work. And if you want to recap your bets, that's great too.
Yeah, so I'm a writer for the Action Network, so you can find 10 to 12 write-ups there weekly from me. I'm on all the major gambling forums like covers.com, Capping the Game, and the RX. And you can find me on Twitter at StepOnADuck1. So to recap the bets that we talked about this week, Sam Houston State minus 9.5. We're still talking on that Tulane game, so still interesting there. I like first half under in Penn State, Ohio State. Still assessing the line on Texas A&M, South Carolina, but I think we talked about liking an under in that matchup there. I like Army this week. Let's see what else we talked about. I like Vanderbilt against the spread against Auburn. I like Oklahoma, lay it minus 34.5 against Maine. I'm in agreement with you on Tulsa-UAB over. Let's see what else we talked about here. Navy minus 12, and I would margin call that on the alternate total. Navy is going to get right this week against Rice, who is in a bad way right now.
Great.
That's it. So there we go.
And then for me, as always, you can find all the plays from the show in the bet tracker in the podcast description below. You can find all my bets in real time at RW33 on Betstamp, and my Twitter at Reed Wallach for a bunch of random musings during the college football slates. And for me, best bets, I got Tulsa over 58, Georgia State plus 7.5, Texas State over 58.5, and Illinois over 45. So a bunch of overs to start the week off. Duck, thank you again as always. Thursday show, we will be back with a guest. Doing 2 guests this week, so excited for that show. We'll cook up around Robin. We'll talk some more bets, and we'll get you ready for week 10. So, Duck, until next time, man, we got to have you on again before the season ends.
Yep, have a great week. I'll see you at the pay window, and look forward to visiting with you again, Reed. Have a great